All right, that's a good sign. Hello, Tim.
Hello, Chris. Good to be with you.
Nice to meet you again.
All right.
Before recording, I appreciate you again agreeing to have this dialogue here today. Today we'll be talking about, well, for all the folks out there who will be watching this video, my name is Chris. I have a channel called The Reconverted Catholic. Tim Staples is from, he's a apologist and writer and speaker from Catholic Answers. And we are today going to talk about, it's actually partly about a short response video I made in my own channel recently about all religions are equally valid or equally true. So I wanted to dive a bit more into that. Me informing my own walk as an apologist and growing, and getting experience and taking some lumps along the way and trial and error and teaching and so forth. I've appreciated Tim's work out on Catholic Answers and other apologists as well. They've been a big help in my dialogues, I know. So thanks again, Tim, for doing this.
Sure.
So
I appreciate you having me.
yeah, definitely. Thank you. So so I'll start with, as I mentioned, this, for example, and this is a pretty common topic, right? I'm sure you receive questions similar to this in your call-in, on call-in shows and so forth. But
Sure.
I saw a meme recently that, and a big discussion about it out on social media, of course, that, it has a picture of Jesus and the Buddha and some other central figures from other religions, and they're all wearing headphones. And then it says the quote is "one truth, many songs."
Yes.
So I wrote my own piece about this and tried to separate out some of the kind of issue with that, including, there's an overarching conversation here, right? That's coming up a lot. Okay. And that's objective truth versus subjective truth. What is truth? Seems like we're really having this dialogue right now in our society, really trying to figure out what's reality versus not reality and so forth, right? And this very much, this topic aggregates up into that. Okay.
Yes.
So I wanted to get some of your thoughts on this.
Yeah.
First off, how do you, for example, when somebody presents this argument of like, okay, yes, I think all paths are true, right? They're all equally valid. How do you first establish what they consider true or what is truth from that?
Right. Well, there are different ways you can approach this question, as we were talking about before we started recording here. But my approach is usually very direct, and I ask folks to consider, Muhammad Ali, if you remember, famously said, of course, when he was younger, he was a little more hardcore Muslim when he first converted, but later he kind of lightened up and said famously, that there's lots of different bodies of water or streams, and they all flow to the same ocean, right? One of the many problems with that approach, which is very popular, as you mentioned, in our culture today, the let's all get along approach, and as you just mentioned, it's very popular. But what I point out to folks is, look, you can't take Islam that says Jesus Christ is not the Son of God. Christianity, Jesus Christ is the Son of God, right? Hinduism, everything is God. Christianity, there's God and there's creation, right? We're talking stark, this is not. So it's impossible logically, reasonably to say that both premises, when you're talking about opposites, are true. Most people do not readily just, off the cuff reject the law of non-contradiction. Now, of course, we have radical skeptics who will even go that far, but the overwhelming majority of people, I think, you can kind of, it's shocking to the system when you lay out these facts, or if they present to you, Chris, the cuddly Jesus, right? Jesus who embraces everything and everyone, lay out examples of the words of our Savior in John 14:6. I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes to the Father except by me. I love the way Jesus said in John chapter 10, verse 8, all who have gone before me are thieves and robbers. I am the door into the sheepfold, right? So in many different ways, Jesus declares not only that he is speaking the truth, but that he is the truth. I am the way, the truth, and the life. Now, of course, the definition of truth is that which is in conformity with reality, right? If a concept in your mind is not in conformity with reality, that concept is wrong. But notice Jesus didn't just say, I teach truth. He said, I am truth. He declares himself to be absolute being, absolute truth. I am the way, the truth, and the life. And you know, Chris, I find right off, in fact, I had this conversation not long ago at a coffee shop right down the street here with a young student from San Diego State University, which is also right up the road here. And I had this conversation, and it was really fun because this guy started, no doubt, living in a bubble here at San Diego State, where everybody's lovey-dovey, and yes, there's no absolute truth. We're all together in this thing, and really, it's just a different way of perhaps of looking at the same truth. And I kind of shocked him a bit, and I think, Chris, that's what we have to do in this culture of ours that is so subsumed by relativism. Even if they don't know what the word relativism means, they are just inundated. It really did shock him a bit. And we got into the moral law and talking about abortion and a lot of things. But I'll tell you what, in just about a 45-minute period of time, this young man said to me, you have really made me think. I am going to have to reconsider some things. So I gave him information about Catholic Answers, our website, and so forth. But don't you think, Chris, that one thing that needs to happen in our age is we've got to enter into the dialogue, because people are in bubbles out there. They've never been confronted, many of them, especially these wet behind the ear college kids who are being, lied to by professors and fed pablum, and they've never really been challenged. We got to challenge them.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. We have to be in the conversation, and it's, I know not everybody steps up for it, right? And it does take quite a bit of courage. Something why I appreciate all the apologists I've come to know over time, because it takes a pretty big leap of courage to get out there and confront these topics, right? And have those conversations. So I totally hear what you're saying. One comment real quick is I appreciate that distinction. It's an excellent distinction in Jesus being truth versus, other claims of what is true, right? So, and something actually else here, and to your point, and what is being fed to, college kids, the university level, or even if you figure in generations, your millennials and Gen Zs and, everything. Yeah.
I can't keep up with all the different generations. Go ahead.
Which one is next now? I'm not sure, but it's funny because it's like I see a lot of, and this is, I think, part of a broader problem in society right now. I mentioned earlier about, truth. What is truth? And it's amazing. It's almost unbelievable that we're having a conversation about this, a big sort of global conversation of what is true.
Yeah.
But also, along those lines is redefining words. This seems to be a big smuggling language and changing words to mean something else, right. Or, for truth, for example, or even other words out there, which goes into other territories. We have pretty significant ideological kind of debates right now in wars, right? Everything from religion and politics to, genders and all the good, all the fun topics out there. But my question for you then too is, and you mentioned, like, for example, on university campuses, you hear a lot of like, let's just all get along, right? That's what matters. And you see this also not only in universities, but it's very much seeped into the corporate world and space and the HR space stuff too, is, basically supplanting.
And we should say, Chris, real quick, we should say, let's all get along, unless you happen to be a believing Christian who believes in absolute truth. Then they're not going to get along with you. They're going to cancel you. But go ahead.
No, that's a fair point. It really is, right? Which is another problem problem with now suppressing, right? Anything that, triggers somebody or upsets, is upsetting, right? And maybe really delves into a more personal area of their life, then it has to be off limits, right? So, again, take the example of love, okay, which sometimes I think, Christ tells us, right, to love one another, right?
Yes.
And see now how this has been so sort of exaggerated, and I know you hear a lot of taken out of context, but it's applied to everything. And it's almost like sometimes a conversation stopper, right? Because it's like, okay, so Jesus said that we should all love each other. So what's the problem with whatever, fill in the blank? You know what I'm saying? Whatever, like if multiple truths, if there's multiple ideologies out there that we're arguing over, the baseline is that we love each other. And on top of it, and what makes it even worse is, and exactly, shutting down, like if it's about religious belief, right, or certain other ideological positions, this not being able to be anything that's considered negative or triggering,
Right.
compounds it even more, because it's like, okay, wait, that sounds like you're not being tolerant. Okay, so we need to stop this right now, and we just need to remember to love each other. So I was actually going to get to that next, right? How do you address that as part of all roads lead to the same truth? How do you address this?
Right. Well, yeah, another really important question, Chris. But I think we have to realize that this thing goes back long before this transgender crisis that we're in now. But think about Planned Parenthood versus Casey, right? To think that the Supreme Court, it's actually worth going back and reading the majority opinion. I think it was 1992, but Casey versus Planned Parenthood, when the Supreme Court of the United States said it's at the heart of liberty that one defines his own meaning of the universe, existence, meaning, and of life itself. This is the Supreme Court of the United States saying this is at the heart of liberty. So we define our own idea of when life begins, life itself, meaning, existence. It's only a matter of time, Chris, when you have the Supreme Court. I mean, there is a manifestation of a deep cultural problem when you have a statement that incoherent. But this has basically worked its way out in our culture, and we're seeing it right now exploding with as you say, on the university campuses, young people, love is love and all of this. And I think one thing we have to do, Chris, is really break it down for those who want to say, love is love. And if you, Chris, say that my love, if I'm a man and I happen to just love another man, who are you to judge, Chris? Right? Who are you to judge? And stay out of it. And if a Christian attempts to say, hey, there's something wrong with that, that Christian sounds like he's from another planet. If he comes onto a university campus where all they hear is love, you're going to sound like, as I said, an alien. And unfortunately, in the atmosphere we've created in this culture, it can be dangerous for the one who's coming on that campus because they will literally attack you. So how do we approach this? What's a good way to start? I'll tell you what I do, Chris. One thing that I do is I try to interject a question. I don't, come right at them and declare, look, natural law says this, but I ask a question. Would you agree that a 45-year-old man declaring he's going to marry his own 10-year-old daughter because he loves her so much, would you agree that that is an inappropriate expression of love? I'm just asking. Mm-hmm. Now, Chris, you got to be ready because there are some who will come back and say, no, I have no problem with that. But the overwhelming majority will. And sometimes you have to retreat a little bit further back. I like Trent Horn. He often, when he's out in the streets with folks, he'll say, would you agree that it's always inappropriate to rape and kill children? Right. Now, on that one, you pretty much get buy-in, right? So if you can, get folks to acknowledge, yeah, that's inappropriate. You know what you've done, Chris, is you've really exploded the myth. Now, it takes a lot more work to work it out, to get people thinking about what it is that they just said. Because what they just said is love is not love. There is, at least in this instance, an inappropriate, even immoral expression of what someone believes to be love. Then you can take it a step deeper and say, okay, well, what is it about that act, whether it's rape, whether it's murder, whatever it is, you can get the zombie you're talking, or excuse me, the person you're talking to, little joke there, Chris, to acknowledge, what is it about that is objectively immoral, and who are you to judge them, right? And get them to try to answer the question. What is it about that act that is in fact objectively immoral? And I think, Chris, you can be off to the races there, because once you acknowledge that something is objectively immoral, there has to be a source then for the objective nature of that immorality. And that cannot come from Chris. It can't come from Tim Stables, because I'm just a dude like you are. I have no power whatsoever to enforce some morality on you, because I'm just like you. I'm a sinner just like you. This points us into the direction of acknowledging. It's John Henry Newman's proof of the existence of God from the existence of the moral law. In order for there to be this moral law that we all know, whether it's the case of raping children, murder, whatever it is, we know that that is objectively immoral, that is objectively wrong, and this points in the direction of there being a lawgiver, because I have no way of saying that anybody is obligated to not rape or kill or do any other of the heinous things that we can demonstrate, or at least we can get buy-in, are objectively immoral. I have no power to say to you, that's wrong, and if you do that, there's going to be repercussions, right? And in fact, if there's no God, ultimately, Chris, there's no difference between someone raping and killing a child and a wave crashing on a beach at Pacific Beach here in San Diego. Because if everything is just chemical reactions and interactions, well, then there is no morality, and you cannot say that. But there's something deep within you that says that's wrong. And then I ask the student or whoever I'm talking to, where does that come from? And I'm telling you, Chris, I'm sure you've done it as well. You can get into some really good discussions about how can we say this is objectively wrong? Doesn't this fly in the face of everything you're being taught at your university, that love is love and who am I to judge and all the rest? No, there appears to be an objective moral order that we are all bound by. That can't come from Chris, can't come from me. In fact, it's real because it comes from Almighty God.
Yeah, that's excellent. Yeah, and I was thinking here, back to a comment you made earlier about a question you can ask and establishing what is love, right? It made me think of too, like when I hear, these sweeping proclamations, right? Like sweeping claims, for example, like whatever makes you happy. That's one of my favorite ones, because then I've asked, for example, right? Okay, so if somebody wants to walk around and run up to a dog and kick a dog because it makes them happy, you know what I mean? Yes. Where are the boundaries, with the two again? So it kind of ties in this and understanding, right? Really fleshing out what you mean, right? When you're just making some big, bold statement and, what exactly that means. With that.
Well, Chris, you know what? What I think you have to do, and I'm speaking a lot from experience, because I'm one of those guys. I love talking with people on airplanes or in, like I said, coffee shops or wherever. And I love the back and forth. A lot of times as apologists, we learn when we engage. It's one thing to be in the books and reading and such, but when you really talk with folks, you really get ideas on how to respond to folks, because you're talking with real people and they're actually responding. But at some point in the conversation, wherever you are on the spectrum, and people are so different. You know, there's no, I learned when I brought my family into the Catholic faith that there's not really a system. You say this, you say this, you say this, and then they become Catholic. Woo! No, it doesn't work that way. Everybody is so different. But at some point, you have to interject the person of Jesus Christ, because just about everybody has an opinion about Jesus. Isn't it something, Chris? I mean, and even if they don't, I'll interject Jesus because of all the people in history, and this is my challenge to folks, of all the people in history, there's something about Jesus. This man stands head and shoulders above all. I was reading Dr. Anthony Flu's book, There Is a God. I don't know if you're familiar with Dr. Flu. Great.
Kind of recanted, right? Or near his.
Yes, he was a famous, probably one of the, if not the greatest atheist thinker of the 20th century. He's in the top few. He was a true atheist, a thinking atheist, debated C.S. Lewis back in the 40s and gave C.S. Lewis a run for his money, in fact. But a great guy. And it was actually a friend of mine, Roy Abraham Varghese, who got to know Dr. Flu and helped him to faith in God. He never got all the way. He got stuck on the immortality of the soul. But in reading his book, Dr. Flu was explaining how he came to believe in God. And the book's titled, There Is a God. And it's a great title because the title actually reads, There Is No God, because he famously wrote an essay back in the 40s, There Is No God. And so the title of the book is There Is No God, but the no is scratched out and there's an A written over it, right? There is a God. But what he says in that book, it's actually in the afterword of the book. He said in his studies, he studied all the world religions. And if you've ever read Anthony Flu, believe him when he says that. He was a brilliant man. He wrote scores of books and he was a brilliant man. I read all the world's religions, but he said Christianity, the apologetics of Christianity were head and shoulders above all. If I were to become anything, it would be Christian. But he explains why he was still stuck. All right. Now I bring that up to say this, that Jesus Christ, when you consider the claims, you know, Chris, the famous line from C.S. Lewis, Jesus Christ is either liar, lunatic, or Lord. I like the way Dr. Peter Kreeft adds guru as well. He's either liar, lunatic, Lord, or guru, right? Because some will claim he's a, well, Jesus does not leave room for any other conclusion other than he is either liar, lunatic, or Lord. Because, you know, you say what you will about Jesus, but this man walked the earth 2,000 years ago. And if we want to fight about that, we can, because there's enormous evidence. Yes, he walked this earth 2,000 years ago, claimed to be God, and went out into the streets of the Middle East and proved he was God. He fulfilled scores of prophecies. He performed miracles and such. But the claim to be God, as C.S. Lewis said, he's either a colossal liar. That is, he knew he was not God, but he claimed to be, which is taking lie to the ultimate degree. He is a lunatic, meaning he thought he was God, but he really isn't. Then he is an absolute nutcase, on par with, as Lewis famously says, on par with a person who believes he's a poached egg, or he is the Lord God of the universe. And I interject that or something to that effect in a conversation, because invariably folks will respond with, oh no, but Jesus was love. He was loving, right? And yeah, we could talk about the definition of love. Love, my friends, to love someone is to will their good, as St. Thomas Aquinas famously says, to will the good of the other. As St. Paul says in 1 Corinthians 13:5, he says, love does not consider its own interests. Yes, Jesus was love, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son. He loved us so much. He came to tell us we are sinners and we need a savior, and he's it. That's what love incarnate does. But Jesus claimed to be God, performed miracles, said, as I said at the beginning of our time together here, I am the way, the truth, and life. No man comes to the Father except by me. All who went before me are thieves and robbers. Man, this is not the language even of Muhammad. Maybe when you hear Muhammad says, go to the Injil, to the gospel, believe it, right? Go to the people of the book and believe what they say, because they will point to me. Muhammad never made the claims that Jesus did, not even close. Jesus said, all went before me, thieves and robbers. I'm it. I'm God, right? Look at Hinduism. They claim Jesus is one of over 100,000 avatars, right? Who just like the Hindus, doesn't really believe there's any absolute truth. As Hindus will tell you, the only real sin is to tell someone they're a sinner. Because, how opposite of that is Jesus Christ, who in John 8:44 puts his finger in the face of the religious leaders of the day and says, you are of your father, the devil. He was a liar from the beginning and you're liars. I mean, this man just breaks the mold of all those who went before him and all who have come since. If you're going to be honest in seeking truth, Chris, this is my charge to folks. I challenge them. Consider Jesus Christ. Because when I did that many years ago, I concluded with C.S. Lewis, there is no way you cannot put this this man in any other category other than the God-man that he claimed to be. So at some point in the conversation, all evangelism, the catechism tells us, ultimately is to present the truth of the gospel of Jesus Christ, the person of Jesus Christ, and what he taught.
Yeah, that's good. So this segues to my next question actually about this. Okay, and this can apply to talking with folks who believe all paths are true. They tend to lean more into either spiritual but not religious, or in that camp, which is a conversation in itself, but it comes from that, crowd. And then it could apply to either atheists or even spiritual but not religious, or just seekers in general, is this. I'm sure you're very well familiar with different logical fallacies. So when somebody says to you, well, that's just special pleading, right?
Yes.
Doesn't necessarily mean it has to be negative, though. That's the thing. Sometimes it's kind of conflated with just always being a negative or a fallacy. That's what I mean. You know what I mean? Like, oh, you can't use that because it's pleading. But how do you get around that when somebody says, like, aha? You know what I mean? Yeah.
Right. Well, you have to take the arguments one at a time. The special pleading. Well, you're making an exception here.
Yeah.
No, we're not making an exception when we're talking about whatever the argument is, whether it's the moral law and such. Jesus and our belief about God is not in a special category that's not bound by the rules of logical fallacies and reasoning. One of the most beautiful texts of St. Paul, I mean, outside of the pericope in Philippians 2:5-10, which I believe is of the incarnation, is Romans chapter 12, where he says, I beseech thee, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies to God as living sacrifices, wholly acceptable unto God, which, catch this, which is your reasonable worship. I love that. Pope Benedict XVI, it was actually when he was Cardinal Ratzinger, in a book on eschatology, actually, he points out that the Greek word there is logike, right? Logike, where we get the word logic, which is your logical worship. And he says, as St. Thomas Aquinas so masterfully put it in the Summa Contra Gentiles, where would that be? That was book 1, chapters 7-9, where, St. Thomas famously says, every error concerning the faith can be traced back to an error in reason. What St. Paul is saying here is that our worship is reasonable. Now, we're not rationalists. You can't reason to the Trinity. right? Because it is supra rational. That is beyond our rational capabilities. But, says St. Paul, says St. Thomas Aquinas, there is nothing irrational about it. And this is why arguments can, from special pleading and any sort of logical fallacy, we can face head on, because there is no logical fallacy in any of our reasoning as Christians, right? Our faith is entirely reasonable. And this is why Thomas Aquinas recommends I always like the Columbo approach, right, to apologetics, where you scratch your head and you ask your question, right? That's Thomas Aquinas had the Columbo approach long before Columbo, because Thomas says in the Summa Contra Gentiles, again in book 1, chapters 7 through 9, that if you're dealing with people who are atheists, who are Muslim, and in particular, that's what Thomas is talking about, don't try to present the mysteries of the faith to them. He says you ask them questions and answer their errors. Because if you try to present the mystery, the Trinity, say, to a Muslim, you are going to be spinning your wheels, man, because without grace, without the sacraments, you're not going to be able to comprehend the Trinity. We can't fully comprehend, never will fully comprehend the Trinity a trillion years, so to speak, in heaven. Right? But what he says is answer their questions about the Trinity, because anything they say, when they come after you and say, well, I don't accept the Trinity because of this, you can point out the logical fallacy in their reasoning. So we can hit all of those claims. What I say, Chris, to folks is bring them on. Let's talk about, why aren't you Christian? Why don't you believe in God? That's the best way to evangelize.
Nice. Yeah. Thank you for that. That's good. So then on that note too, right? So say you're in your dialogue with somebody, right? Who is, again, they have this position at first that, yes, well, all paths are equally valid. You're maybe at this point in the conversation, we're also showing how it's not really about special pleading, right? And that our faith is very much rooted in being rational, and even this great balance between faith and reason, which I often talk about in my teaching, that we as Catholics are very much fully, on board with that and understanding that balance between the two, right? And
right.
Our faith tradition too. So, but I have I've kind of coined a term here too. I use it a lot, probably maybe too much now too, but I call it, and it relates to this, right? And a problem that we have within our society of just focusing a lot more inward of what do I want? What do I need? What are my rights? What are my privileges? This has really been going on for now, especially in the last 60 years in our Western society. It's very much become very prevalent society. So I call it, what's in it for me, spirituality, so that kind of ties into this, because again, a lot of the same folks, when they're defining their own truth, they'll either say, we all have our own truth, or all paths are equally valid. And it's all pointing to, what's going to satisfy me, and that's what's going to work, right? So besides the obvious that it's a more sort of selfish inward look, right, at, what people think they should believe or think they should believe, how do you address that? Hopefully that isn't, I'm not getting too abstract in the question, but how do you address that when somebody's in this, again, they're looking more for what's going to benefit them versus, how we understand as Catholics is we're looking to build a relationship with God. We're looking out and making that connection that way.
Right. No, Chris, I think it's a great question, actually. And here's how I would respond to that. The what's in it for me spirituality is childish on its face, right? But we have a culture that has this incredibly prolonged adolescence.
Yeah.
You look at some of these professors on university campuses and the way they present themselves, they're like 12-year-olds. And the what's in it for me spirituality is a very difficult thing to break through, because again, it's so pervasive in our culture, right? Well, there's a couple of ways to approach this. There is that shock effect that you can use in the presentations say of Jesus Christ and what love really is, and so forth. And that can work. Just proclaim the gospel of Jesus Christ and showing that, God is love. And let me tell you something, sir, this is what love is, right? God, when he created, think of this, Chris, when God created the universe, why did he do it? When in fact, God is infinite perfection. You can't add anything to God. And when God created, that creation wasn't going to add anything to him. In fact, God knew before he created that one day that creation would kill him. And he decided to create anyway. That's love. He created not to get anything, but to give. And that's what God has done from all eternity. He pours himself out without asking anything in return. And really, the redemption of Christ is nothing more than God just acting like God. He continues to pour himself out with not only not asking anything in return, knowing that we can't give him anything in return. I mean, as St. Augustine said, even our final salvation is nothing more than God crowning his own gifts. We have nothing to give to God except that which he gives us, right? This is what love is. Jesus Christ on the cross. And I'll tell you what, Chris, that kind of presentation to these children who are, I want my mommy, what's in it for me, can shock people into reality. And that is a legitimate approach in approaching this age of spiritual children all around us. But that's not the only way, because there is also the kind of carrot presentation where, okay, what's in it for me? If you have a person who is stuck in that mentality, as parents, I mean, I got Jim Phelps here, she's a mom, and I've got 7 kids. A lot of times when you're dealing with children, you have to show them what's in it for them, right? And that is a legitimate approach as well in presenting to people, look, we're talking about heaven. What's in it for you? How about an eternity face to face with God with joy unspeakable and full of glory? That's what God offers to you. If you will, it's kind of, Pascal's wager sort of a presentation, which I know in a lot of circles isn't very popular, but I believe there's legitimacy to that. I guess, Chris, what I say is, with St. Paul in 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 22, he says, I've become all things to all men that by all means I might save some. I think there's something to be said for that, Chris, that if I'm with the Jews, he says, I become like a Jew. When I'm with the Gentiles, I become like a Gentile, right? Apart from the law, but of course not apart from all law, because I'm under the law of Christ. But it's in that context where he says, I become all things to all men. And I love the fact Pope Francis, in his first apostolic exhortation, Evangelii Gaudium, in section 132, Pope Francis says that in this modern era in which we live, we are in need of a creative apologetic. We've got to find new ways to reach a new generation. Now, that doesn't mean some substantially new argument, because we've pretty much got it covered when it comes to the substance of argumentation, but a creative presentation in a generation that has gone wild. I mean, we're living in times, think of this, Chris, where euthanasia is just, of course, in our culture. Of course you kill old people just like you'd put down a dog. It's cruel not to put down a dog if he's suffering, so why wouldn't you put down grandma? I mean, this is, I believe it was Pope St. John Paul the Great in Evangelium Vitae, as I recall, who said that mentality was unknown to the inspired authors of sacred scripture. Euthanasia wasn't even on their radar screen. The idea of transgenderism and so many more of these concepts that we're coming up with today are not dealt with. Yeah, you have Leviticus talking about men shouldn't wear women's clothes, or in Deuteronomy or men, but we've gone way past that. And so we need, I believe Pope Francis's words are prophetic there, a creative apologetic. Yeah, reach people where they are. If you've got a bunch of adolescents, man, you got to at times get down on their level, reason with them, as using an argument like Pascal's wager.
Yeah, so a couple of quick comments about that. First, I agree with you about Pascal's wager. I think it's just unfortunate that, as particularly when dialoguing, say, with atheists, right? That it's, there's kind of this view of Christians that they're just like, well, what do I got to lose? Kind of with that, right? Or
Right.
better option than burning in hell, kind of thing. And that's
that's
that's actually not really.
That's not really, yeah.
Of Pascal's wager. It's so kind of distorted, you know what I mean? But I'm with you on, I absolutely agree with you on that.
Yeah, it's about reasoning with people. It basically what we're doing, Chris, all apologetics is bringing people to reality.
That's right. Yes.
We have a culture that has gone insane. As Frank Sheed, what does insane mean?
Yeah.
Right? It's when you are, when you lose what is the human, right? That, to be human is to be in conformity with reality. That's what we're ordered to. Our intellects are ordered to ultimate truth. Our wills are ordered to choose the ultimate good, which is God, and to be able to see the truth and goodness of all things in relation to God. That's what sanity is, right? You're seeing reality. So when you depart from that, people, isn't it mean that the scriptures in Psalm 53 verses 1 and 2 and Psalm 14 verses 1 and 2, the fool says in his heart there is no God, right? Oh, isn't that mean? No, it's not mean. It's true. The truth is that when you don't embrace truth, you're in a delusion, you're in a lie. That's the definition of insanity, as Frank Sheep points out. Of course, in our modern era, I wouldn't recommend starting a conversation that way at a university, but it's true. Apologetics is all about bringing people in line with reality. And there's lots of different ways to bring them to that reality. I say we try to do it in every which way but loose, because we're in a time where it's unprecedented despair in this generation all throughout the world. Just real quick, I'm sorry I tend to ramble a bit, Chris, but reading Eschatology by Cardinal Ratzinger, it's just a brilliant book. But he talks about in there about the foolishness of presenting heaven as just an extension of this life, except, we'll all be picking fruit off trees and, we'll be quote unquote happy. And hell as an extension of this life, just really, really bad. That's not what hell or what heaven is. But the point is, what grabbed me is he said, when you present heaven that way, you are going to lose most of the world in your presentation. Why? Because most of the world is miserable. Most of the world lives in poverty. And in fact, even most of the wealthy world, most are living in misery because they're lost. Right now, this is a whole nother topic. He's talking about the presentation of heaven and what heaven really is. But I do believe there's something really important there that transcends what Cardinal Ratzinger was talking about. Our presentation needs to be joy-filled, joyful, and needs to present goodness and truth and beauty. That's a whole nother hour we could talk about, Chris. Just the presentation of beauty will draw people to God, right? The presentation of the transcendentals, truth, beauty, goodness, will draw people intuitively, if not even intellectually, right? Where they fully comprehend what's going on here. Just a presentation of the beautiful. And as well, Chris, people who have a loving and living relationship with Jesus are going to draw people to truth because of who they are as well. And again, that's a whole nother topic for another time.
Yeah, it is for sure. Yeah, and it just made me think here too, because I've been, in addition to this YouTube channel I started earlier this year, and been getting out and and teaching and sharing the gospel message, and including now out in more public space and more evolving street evangelization, starting to embark more into that. And, you know, something you just mentioned, and, you know, a whole lot of folks just being miserable for many different reasons, right? And just feeling kind of lost and despaired and trying to, you know, like existential crisis left and right. Everybody trying to figure out who am I and what am I, right? You know, is I remember one of the folks who works within a street evangelization team here, we were talking about this recently, and, you know, he said, you know, a lot of folks he finds are hurting. So this kind of fits with what you're saying, right? And how important it is just to listen, just let them get out, you know, what they're thinking, what they're feeling. Of course, ask some questions to try to understand what is their frame of reference, did they had any belief ever, or what, et cetera, et cetera. But really, you find that you spend actually a lot of time first just trying to get out a lot of the what they have sort of built up, pent up inside them that they want to sort of vomit out, you know what I mean, so to speak. And, you know, and then addressing that, you know, and having the conversation from there. So yeah, it's very real what you're saying, that you're having, and hence why we have to employ every creative means to have a conversation, you know, so yes. So
Yeah, we're living in a time where people are absolutely fearful of being silent.
yes.
Everywhere you go, there's noise. What was I watching the other day? It was an actress being interviewed. I can't remember her name. It was Karen Valentine. It was an old Karen Valentine. And this interview was from years back. And at the time, she was the hottest thing. She was on Room 222. Maybe you're not old enough to remember that. I don't know. Anyway, I remember it. Used to watch it. But she was talking about her life and how successful she was. But then she, right in the middle of the interview, started saying how miserable she was, right? And she started saying the reasons why she was miserable. And in the midst of the interview, she said, I keep my TV on all night, right? So catch that. Every night she falls asleep to the TV and the TV stays on all night. And I was just going, oh my Lord, there you have a prime example of someone who was lost. Now I pray to God she wasn't. Maybe I'm misreading, and maybe she was a good Christian, though I doubt it. But that's the picture of our age, where she has to have noise on. She can't have silence. Why? Because if you have silence, you all of a sudden have to think. And if you have to think, you start thinking about things like your own miserable existence. And what does this all mean? Which folks spend a lifetime running from, Chris. They go drinking, they do everything they can. It's, you know, we say this all the time. We quote it as a cliche, but it's not a cliche. St. Augustine, in the very beginning of the Confessions, you know, thou hast made us for thyself, and our hearts are restless until they rest in thee. Our hearts will remain restless until they rest in him. And so again, this is kind of where we started, Chris, but we've got to engage. We've got to engage people. We're living in a time of absolute despair, where of people fighting and raging. You know, you look at all that's going on, whether it's Antifa or Black Lives Matter or so many of these groups that are fighting, and they're violent and they're hateful. And you're just saying, oh my Lord, we've got to cut through all of this with love. God is in fact love, the ultimate and absolute love, who wills the good for all of us. I mean, so many, Chris, don't believe that even exists, and we've got to show them. And one way is by engaging and living it in our own lives, because people will pick up on it if you're experiencing it and you're sharing it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, in fact, I mentioned earlier about the short response video I made for my channel about, again, this topic for today. And it's something I mentioned in that made me think of that, you know, yes, our whole faith is predicated on love. It is really, you know, goes back to what part of why I asked the question about special pleading earlier too, because it really is. It really is the only faith there too that is entirely predicated on that, right? And to your point, that's get to the core of that message, right, and sharing it. So that's, yeah. I tell you what, Tim, I really appreciate this. Really, I do. I appreciate you, you know, taking this time here today. And just as I expected, you know, really great answers to these questions. This is really helpful, you know, and I'm wanting to use this as a teaching tool too, you know, partly why I like to have these conversations. So, you know, I can.
All right, brother. Well, I appreciate you having me, and keep up the good work, man, because people need reality. and you're getting it out there.
Yeah, thank you. And also thanks to Jennifer too. So I really appreciated her arranging this. And so, yeah.
All right, brother.
All right. Enjoy the rest of your week too.
Okay, man. God bless.